ambitious workers, in the entrepreneurial business community, and leadership across the public and private sectors. But the challenges are real and they can't be swept under the rug. Resilience, digitalization, design standards that are all outdated and need to reflect the moment. With billions coming to communities in the state in terms of federal dollars, the question is, how is Florida going to grow in the future? And I'm confident that the state has the tools and the leadership and the people to make the right decisions for the future. So thanks again to you, Eli, for the time, and really interested to talk about LEROY a little bit more and hopefully folks in the audience.
Wow, Adi, thank you so much. That's a lot to unpack. I almost wish we had put you on 33 speed there, you know, so that we could actually absorb that a little bit better. It's just so much to cover. We already have a few questions that are populating in our chat log, but I want to start off with the question to you. You live in the DC metro area now. You know, DC is certainly one of the most matured transportation option, cities that we have in the U.S. I've lived in Oakland, Chicago, Atlanta, and DC as well. I moved to Florida 23 years ago, and I love Florida. I love Tampa in particular, and I would choose Tampa over any of those other 4 areas, you know, with all of the, incredible opportunity and, that they actually have, especially from a transportation. So just focusing on transportation inequities in particular, what has, the DC market deployed that you feel is appropriate for Florida in terms of, bridging the gap on transportation inequalities throughout our state?
Yeah, totally. First of all, as a Sarasota native, we look to Tampa all the time for big time entertainment. I'm kind of like, there's my Buccaneers swag on my shelf. So hopefully those are real bona fides right there. I can't wait to get down for a game this year. So it's great that you love the community. I think it's awesome too. I really do, and I miss it every day. Florida made a promise. I mentioned it when I was talking about, everything, all these roads in Sarasota County went from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. It was, hey, we're going to keep building out, but don't worry about it. We're going to widen these roads. It's just going to work. And what we know now, and this is not a Florida truth, this is a human truth. You see this kind of stuff out of China when they have like a day-long, traffic jam, is that when you build wider roads, it does this thing called induced demand, which is a wonky way of saying widen roads, build more property. It just makes people drive more. And that doesn't mean necessarily more people. It's just each person is driving more miles. They're on the road more. And it just leads to more congestion. In Sarasota, and I know probably folks certainly in Southeast Florida and Tampa probably complain about it too, life is so good there, but it often means the number one problem then for people is traffic. And they want to know, how do we solve it? The problem is when you're a prosperous community, whether you're in New York, San Francisco, or Tampa, Miami, Jacksonville, Orlando, there's no solving traffic. Traffic is a sign of actual prosperity, right? It means people are there, they're doing things. What we know out of places like DC is we've got to build differently. We've got to give people real options. Running a bus every 30 minutes running in that same congestion traffic too, that's not a good option. People are going to keep picking driving, right? Putting bike lanes that are unprotected on a 45-mile-per-hour speed limit road, which we all know means people are driving 55 miles per hour, that's not safe biking, and people don't want to do it. They're just going to cross that road, potentially go between cul-de-sac to cul-de-sac based neighborhood, right? So what we know from places like DC and New York and San Francisco that they kind of lucked into, and that's the secret. So the challenge is harder in Tampa and Orlando, et cetera, is actually we've got to give people real options by making driving more uncomfortable than it already is. Some of the easiest ways to do that, making parking more expensive, right? We always hear people don't want to do it, but part of the reason they want to do it in Florida is because they don't feel like they have those viable other options. So then the other thing is, how do we build out things like bus rapid transit corridors, which are really cheap, make buses more attractive. America has somehow gotten this idea. You don't see it in other parts of the world. And it's actually one of the hardest parts for me to swallow as an American is why is like a big shiny bus that frankly is cleaner and nicer than my car, why is that considered not as preferred of a transportation option? So if we can make buses more attractive, what's great for Florida is it's so much cheaper to build. So we don't have to build out all these rail lines. I love rail, by the way. If you can get it, it's great. But we know that, in Tampa, Hillsborough County has been exploring this, Pinellas, right? How do we make sure that we can get those high frequency corridors in the books? I'll give you one final example. My wife is from Cleveland, Ohio. They built out a bus rapid transit corridor, not a fast growing area, That one corridor, which probably a lot of ULI folks know, maybe $50+ million to build, attracted $4 billion in real estate investment. So BRT can work, it can make attractive options, and maybe we'll get people out of their cars and really connect people to opportunity who can't afford one right now.
Well, yeah, that's a great insight. And your point earlier that it's just far too cheap for us to drive in Florida. You know, we've got to invest in the future that we want, and not just continue to live with what we have. I want to go to our chat log. We have a question for Ron, and this might be a little bit too inside Florida for you, but I want to give it to you, as well as the budget in DC is sort of still in a little bit of state of flux, even though it looks like it's coming in for a landing soon. But can you, at this early stage, you know, answer this question? Will federal budgeting jeopardize any of Florida advantages in the federal tax code that you can see at this point?
I don't think so. That's my gut. The biggest thing that's debate on the table is whether the Democrats are going to get rid of the state and local tax deduction. That plays a lot bigger in, of course, the Northeast and the Midwest and high tax communities. That's not really in play meaning, I don't even know if it's in play either way. I think the exemption's not gonna, I don't think they're gonna get rid of it. It's just so expensive. You know, there could be some impacts, of course, on how retirees are able to, frankly, manage their income. You know, there's some real talk there, and of course, that can always impact Florida. But you know, these have ebbed and waved, and I have no problem saying how old I am, since I'm truly middle-aged now. And so I just turned 40 this year. You know, in those 30-ish years that I've been hearing about this, right? You know, tax law, they don't impact those sunsets, right? Like the high quality of life. I think what Florida's most attractive economic model, of course, is all that bounty, and then the income tax model, and you know, it really works for people. So the reason I say that is, I think it's a great question. Probably decisions in Tallahassee are going to have a much bigger impact than what's in Washington.
Excellent point. Okay, Taylor asked a question here. How can municipalities quickly adopt more data-based approaches to analyzing the fully loaded cost of infrastructure investments? And he gives examples factoring in deaths and health impacts, lifestyle, affordability, inclusive, and transportation costs, workforce development, quality of life, return on investments, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, how can municipalities quickly adapt more data-based approaches in analyzing those fully loaded costs? I think is his primary question.
Yeah, wow, it's a great question, Taylor. I wish I could say, I literally had goosebumps. You should send your resume to LEROY or me if you're looking for some. Wow, that's so good. You're actually hitting the nail on the head of what, let's call them like the gazelles or like the vanguard communities across the country are asking. We know the private sector has this kind of information. There's all this stuff from the digital firms, Facebook, Google, who just frankly have access to your data, and then frankly, or you give it to them. So they're at the cutting edge. We know, let's say, private health insurers know a ton about public health outcomes, right? But they have that data. The public sector, it's not so much that they compete with them, but to be an equal partner, they need to have the same kind of cutting edge capabilities for exactly the kind of stuff that Taylor just listed out. So what does this mean? First of all, it's a completely different staffing model than what we're used to. And what that means is we've got to think less about necessarily folks who have certain expertise. And by the way, I mean growing the staffing model in the public sector. I obviously love government. I'm a big believer in it. It's the company that works for everyone in theory. So growing its staff is a good thing. And the federal government is going to be providing the resources right now for us to test that out. So let's go beyond just having, let's say, civil or electrical engineers. We need more data scientists inside government to help work with those folks and other managers, let's say inside your department, right, LEROY, to better connect what the data means, to translate their very outcome-oriented questions or outcomes that Taylor just listed, figuring out what kind of data we need, how do we get it in-house. It also means a new set of procurement models. The most boring of all topics, yet maybe the most important, right? You know, if you work for a public sector or you liaise with them, and they've got a procurement model that requires them to buy data, not to have cloud subscriptions, then there's maybe nothing more important you could do right now than to change that procurement model. Same thing for hardware, right? Making big investments in the public sector, you don't need that right now. All of us probably have an Apple or Google data subscription ourselves, right? We work off their cloud-based hardware. So we've got to change that. And then it's investments in the kind of hardware like sensors that will collect data that no one else is collecting for you. So if you can invest in your software, your people, and then your physical capital in the right ways, then it just comes down to managers making like just smart decisions, right? Like, hey, you know what? It's not about, to get the traffic example, it's not about solving congestion or like thinking about how we widen these roads. It's, hey, you know, especially our neighborhoods most at risk in terms of transportation options, right? Are they able to connect opportunity? How can we survey them or better understand? It's really tracking, right? Where are those public safety issues in terms of crossing the street? We know that Florida's metropolitan areas are, right, as my colleagues in DC call it, the most dangerous by design. So how can we find the right places to make new design investments? So once you get all those ingredients in place, you know, I'm confident that, because the folks in the public sector, they always want to do good. So just give them ingredients and they'll make good on it.
Great. We got about 5 minutes left. Adi, and you're in DC, so you know you've got a better ear to this than all of us from a standpoint of the federal budget negotiations. Despite the threat for government shutdown, as you said, that's sort of used every year, seems like these days politically. But you actually made a prediction that you believe both budgets will actually pass, this year, this month potentially. Just sort of give us a little bit of feel for what you think. And when we're talking about both budgets, we're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, the infrastructure budget, and then there's sort of a different budget that has more human infrastructure type funding opportunities.
Yeah, totally. And I'm happy to kind of both, sit around. I don't need to put in a plug because our stuff is free. So it's like, and I don't get anything to click on it. So like you can go to Brookings all the time. Not to read my stuff from others. They'll keep you up to date on the federal questions, right? And of course, read the Herald, the Tampa Times, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal. They'll keep you up on this. Leroy, you're exactly right. There's a big infrastructure bill. It's already passed the Senate. So if it's not amended, the House basically can just vote on that bill. It immediately goes to the president's desk. And that's really important. So otherwise they do this thing to get into your, it's like college civics. I feel like they didn't talk about high school. Something called the conference committee, where the House and the Senate come together to negotiate on bills that are a little bit different. We most likely will see that some version of that on the reconciliation bill. That's the second part you talked about. That actually funds the whole government for a year. And as big as that is, that's actually the sideshow for what's the real attraction, which is this new investment in human-focused infrastructure. And actually what ended up happening, I'm glad you brought it up. So that's where you'll see big debates on, universal pre-K, something I have no problem saying out loud. I have 3 little kids and we could afford it. I cannot believe we don't have that in a country as wealthy as ours. So I hope we get that across the line. There's gonna be some really tricky stuff on Medicare changes for dental and vision. So those big things are at play, but there's also a huge part on clean energy. $150 billion alone to switch to what's called a clean electricity standard, which is basically a way for those who are listening, think of FPL, for them to, if they don't switch already to renewable energy sources, it kind of like slowly turns up the penalties, but also the incentives on the other side to try to get us to have clean energy. And again, we're set up for this. So I'm so excited to see where the energy future is there. The feds are going to help make that happen. The politics here are really complicated. It's I didn't understand this till I worked in DC for many years, and Leroy, you know this stuff too from your work in government. The news you read can sometimes be a false signal. So right now, because this debt ceiling issue and some other politics at play, it can seem negative in the moment. But while it's hard to promise any month in particular, for the transportation nerds here, myself included, know the surface transportation bill, the highway money that comes to the state, expires in however many days are in September, 8 days, 9 days, whatever it is. They're going to need to extend that no matter what. And let's say they only kick that can 30 days, you could expect probably the reconciliation bill, because they're going to be tied together now, infrastructure reconciliation, to get over the finish line in about, let's say the end of October. At the very worst, it's going to get over the finish line by the end of December. Everyone's just jockeying for what they want in that big budget bill. In the end of the day, they're all going to vote for it on the Democratic side. The votes are there in the Senate too, if they need it, because this is going to be crucial for midterm elections, to say nothing of the prosperity of American people.
Awesome. I think time just for one more question for you from the chat. what role should weatherization, co-living, and ADUs, accessory dwelling units, and corporate donors like Charlotte play in affordable housing?
It's a great question. I don't have a great answer. I'm not a housing expert. So the stuff I've talked about today is stuff I do know. I struggle answering stuff I don't know.
Right.
I will say this though, the part of, if you go back to that Sarasota image I put down, when you get right off US 41, 6-lane road, and again, you all know what it looks like. Strip mall is just like every other part of Florida, right? So some old, some new. You go right behind those, single family housing zone.
Right.
Not everywhere, but most of the apartments that are there honestly have been grandfathered. Now Sarasota County is doing everything they can to change that. So that's the part that does touch my work, which is we've got to figure out how to change these zoning ordinances that are not just restrictive. Frankly, their genesis, as we've learned out of Berkeley, California, 100 years ago, they were deeply racist. And that's not who we should be as a people. And it's not who we need to be in the future, to say another right now too, right? So we've got to get those zoning ordinances off the books. They have bad history, bad impacts, and let's let communities decide for themselves. So I think if we do that, that's actually the most important affordable housing intervention we can do, at least purely on land, right? But Leroy, this is your lane, so you know a lot on the housing stuff.
No, and I think you did a great job at that. And I think the genesis of that question was, and I saw your slide that showed Sarasota and right down US 41, how low density that area of the city is. The ADU question, we could immediately increase density in an enormous way in a lot of our municipalities by simply adopting an ADU ordinance that allows a lot of those single family properties to become multifamily, in a small scale. And that adds an additional unit for either rental so that that family can live more affordably with that revenue coming in, or to house an additional related family on the same plot of land. So that's a much more wiser use of our land going forward. We are out of time, Adi, and I just want to thank you so much. This session was full of great information and keen insights, which has given me, as well as this audience, a lot to think about as we consider how best to plan and prepare for an unprecedented opportunity to affect change in our state. If you'd like to continue the conversation, please join me and Adi in the networking lounge. We will be at the Zom Living table. It is now time for a short break until 11 o'clock, but be sure to join us for the closing session you won't want to miss, featuring South Florida icons, the Honorable Secretary Donna Shalala, as well as Stuart Maldner. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest.